We're not quite sure where he was actually born. It would seem that the name Patricius is linked with a patrician estate which the family had in virtue of his father's birth and service, and that he himself had another name. But it's Patrick that remained, and he had, one can see from his confession, a good culture behind him, for the Latin is perfect, and therefore he had that Roman education, whatever happened later in time. You know the story, these pirates, and you can imagine the distress of that young man, because once caught there was practically no hope of escape. Should one try it, the penalty was awful. Providence, of course, was not absent. And there in Schlemisch, that area where he was for about 6 years, he would have heard the local language and learned the customs of the people. But he had the courage to move. Now, when he was looking after the herds, he was not looking at his smartphone, but picking up things from the Holy Ghost, for there was nothing else. Silence is a cruel but firm master, and one needs it. Don't spend your life on the surface of life. Don't be afraid of letting the Holy Ghost himself be your interior master. But for that, there are certain conditions which apply. And so he risked trudging and trudging and trudging and managed to get a boat. Wherever his birthplace is, he had this link with the Celtic world. He moved around. At one point, we know from a local Welsh tradition, something happened which left its print on that part of Wales. He was in a terrible storm at sea, and he vowed that if he got out alive, he would build a church wherever he landed. He was allowed to come out of it alive, and at St. Patrick, Church of St. Patrick, he built a church which gave its name to the little village which is there to this day, which carries his name. Now, the Anglican Church has all these churches, and they have kept them, and they respect them, fair play for them. And so the local people in St. Patrick, on the island of Anglesey, opposite where we live, are proud of their tradition. The present church is not the one that his own hands put together, because he couldn't. He only had the means that he had. And so the wooden church gave place eventually to a stone church. The place is the same. And there is a cross-fertilization always between Ireland and Wales. In student days, we used to go and pray on an island which becomes an island when the sea is in, and it's Cuiva. And it's possible that that was Kevin, the same that settled eventually at Glendalough. And when one is there in the church, which actually they still keep open, one can sense time passing and not in a hurry to pass. These saints knew how to find and found places of encounter with heaven. I move on. He was worked upon, Patrick, by the Holy Ghost, and it seems, without too much opposition from his good parents, was allowed to try and pursue his vocation to the priesthood. He travelled. Now this is going to be important as well, for he travelled a long way. Now remember, in those days the waterways are the motorways of the time. As long as there's no storm or pirates, one gets from A to B. And he got precisely to where other people landed for the same kind of reason. It's an island off the south coast of France, Cannes. The island is Saint-Honorat, and it's the island of Les Reims, where there is a monastery to this day, which actually has done quite well. So much so that they were able to found a few years ago, reopen another Cistercian monastery, Saint-Ancre. They have liturgy which is somewhat Byzantine, beautiful actually. He was there. But that is also the place where others of weight came, stayed and moved on. Notably, the great St. John Cassian. He had been there, and you know that Cassian and his friend Germanus went, after their monastic profession, around the Egyptian desert with the equivalent of a notebook and copied down the conferences and sayings of the fathers. They are the current conferences of Cassian, which St. Benedict commanded to be read each night before Compline. So there is an influence coming from the Egyptian desert there, which he would have picked up. That could also help us to understand how the church that eventually developed in Ireland, as in Wales actually, was very monastic in structure and tone. Penitential, but actually peaceful, because the monasteries were centres of peace and unviolent evangelization, radiation of grace, learning, and even actually of charity in the form of healing, for they had the knowledge that was there to do everything. And so, when Pope Celestine, moved by that same Holy Ghost, became aware of the darkness of the western fringe of Europe, he felt there had to be some movement to evangelize that part of the distant western world. He consecrated initially Palladius. He fell ill after a year, and word got to the Pope that there was a young man who had knowledge of the Irish ways, language and culture. So he was consecrated bishop for Ireland. He had nothing and he had everything. One man and God is a majority. And he himself is surprised at the way in which God and man seem to be working together in this fight against the dark. We have his words on the matter in elegant Latin. The word confiteor, which we use at the beginning of Holy Mass, I confess, translates the Hebrew of giving thanks. There is no word directly for to thank in Hebrew. One confesses the God. So here he's using this language. I give thanks, confiteor, to my God tirelessly, who kept me faithful in the day of trial. Now, trials weren't lacking, because he knew how to hit hard. Like the Jesuits much later in time, go to the top, get the king. And of course, kings were at loggerheads with each other, clans, tribes. So that today I offer sacrifice to him confidently. Now, this language is sacerdotal. He is bishop. He has the power to consecrate other bishops and to celebrate all the sacraments. And in the documents that have come down to us from the Celtic Church, the bishop had to consecrate churches, had to appoint clergy, and the divine office had to be said daily in these churches. There was a whole structure which developed in the Celtic Church. The living sacrifice of my life to Christ my Lord, who preserved me in all my troubles. I can say therefore, who am I, Lord? And what is my calling? That you should cooperate with me with such divine power. He's referring here to what happens and still happens in the first wave of evangelization. Twice over in my student life, I've been living with missionaries. First time in Dublin, while studying in Milltown Park, living with missionaries in Rathgar. The whole of the Irish missions in those days used to have its centre there, and we knew exactly where all the hundreds and thousands of missionaries were all over the world. There were a lot, men and women, some at great risk. But I listened to what they had to say. This was serious table talk. It wasn't infighting, it was hand-to-hand combat with old Nick. He was out there, and out there to get them. In fact, one of our brethren went down to the Côte d'Ivoire from Italy and sent us a letter back. He was celebrating benediction. And as he elevated the monstrance, as we'll be doing now shortly afterwards, so we're having adoration afterwards to make up for all that goes on this day, he was about to make the sign of the cross, to bless them all, and this lady in front of him in the congregation started to levitate, poised in levitation in the air, and suddenly catapulted against the wall of the church. Thump! Obviously, she was involved with you-know-what, and the you-know-what couldn't bear it. The power of the Blessed Sacrament. The other time was in Rome, after ordination, living with American missionaries at Maryknoll College. Maryknoll would be the missionary branch of the American church. And again, serious table talk and homilies. The prior rector, probably dead by now, he was already in his 80s, given all his life to Africa, would tell us when one is down in Africa in the first evangelization, it's not the same as out here in Rome. In Rome, he explained, you have many priests and the holy sacrifices at every corner and all the time. In darkest Africa, it's a different ballgame. The other side doesn't want to relinquish its age-old hold. And he came up with stories of things that would go on in the realm of witchcraft, which would make your hair stand on end. They have real power, and this power was out to get them. But he would calmly say, and this is the point I'm getting at, we priests do not know the power that we have. An American saying this now. He said this. A lady came to him with her dying child. The baby had no hope, not much medicine down there. So he laid his hands on the child and blessed it. And calmly added, now that child is a fine young man of 20 years old. Reminding us not to be lazy or shy about using the power that we have. For the power to consecrate also extends to many things that priests forget about. So, this is what happened with Patrick. People who can't read or write will suddenly be massively shocked by a miracle before their eyes. And that's what Patrick is referring to, the miracles. It always happens in the first wave, and it works. It works also to this day in places which were sanctified by the passage of our saints. I mentioned Wales. In our diocese in the north, we have a well, which goes back to the same period. St. Winifred was a martyr of virginity, where her head was chopped, the holy well, Holywell, came up, and is still gushing forth to this day. You can see it. And they could never, ever stop the miracles. Of course, Protestants would want to be healed, wouldn't they? Wherever it's coming from. So you can see from the graffiti that in the heart of the persecution, they too were saying thank you. They would go away, and because of persecution, they would say to each other, oh, what wonderful water. And one day, the persecution became violent, and they chopped off the head of the statue of St. Winifred. And those who did it, 3 days later, from natural causes, were dead. The arm of the Lord is not shortened, and he has a language that people of the time and culture will understand. I make a jump in time. The consequences were massive. This land kept the light of learning. That torch, which was being extinguished in the Dark Ages in mainland Europe, was kept alive in the scriptoria of this island of saints and scholars. Proof. Those masterpieces that we can still look at, the Book of Kells, the Book of Durrow, and so on, they were careful about the sacred texts. This was their life. And they also transmitted what we were studying in college, thanks to them, the classics. If it weren't for them, we could not read the likes of Cicero today. What happened? The demon hates the church. He hates the truth. He hates the hymns of grace. He hates the Blessed Sacrament above all. And so he found a weak link, actually by descent a Welshman, Harry Ruthven, Henry VIII, a Tudor, Tydir, who had a problem with his marriage and brought the whole of the English church down and opened the door not just to schism, but to heresy. And Ireland was drawn into it because of political links. And so persecution came in. But Ireland was a thorn in the flesh. The simple people would not let go of the rosary. Cromwell testifies that all his efforts had not managed to take away that horrible thing from their hands. Not far from here, we know of the bloodshed in Drogheda, to make a lesson for the people to watch and hear. But it didn't work. Famine, persecution, exile, by the thousand to the likes of Barbados. But of course, wherever they went, the faith went with them. Think of the Kennedys and so on of America. Massive influence through missions. The Irish church was a beacon in the dark for centuries. And therefore we can see why Satan wanted this last jewel for his crown. I'm going to hit Ireland more than any other country. I'm going to bring it down. It's going to serve me. And so he found the weak links, his pulpit, the media, and all that goes with it. Isn't he clever? Where does that leave us? It leaves us, my friends, on the winning side. Patrick is with us. The thousands and thousands of hidden saints in Ireland struggled until the end are with us. For the truth is ours. We need to be careful that we don't play the other side's game. Remember how the devil had to admit in exorcism he hasn't permission to enter the family where the rosary is said.
Padre